کاوش مدیا.
I'm not very optimistic that there is much scope for agreement, whether on missiles, whether on Iran's missiles, whether on Iran's support for non-state armed groups throughout the region, or even more ambitious than that, some kind of regional security architecture. Iran is willing to negotiate on the nuclear deal. It is willing to offer concessions in terms of stepping back on some aspects of its program in exchange for sanctions. The scope for an agreement is there. There's no doubt. The issue is whether the politics will allow us to get there. Iran, I don't think, is very much willing to let go, to make any kinds of concessions on its missiles. Maybe cap some of the distance on the longer range ICBMs. That's possible, but that's fairly limited in scope then. For Iran, as was said before, as is well known, its missile program and its support for non-state armed groups in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, etc., is essential to its security, and it will not bargain that away. And the other thing I would add is, from Iran's perspective, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, it has the upper hand. Whereas on the nuclear program, I think Iran does not have the upper hand because it needs the sanctions relief, because there's a debate as to how much, but it needs it. It hurts. In Yemen, the Houthis are on top. The Houthis are the most powerful actor in Yemen right now. In Syria, Assad is weak. He's presiding over a hollowed out and corrupt government, but he won the war. Hasn't won the peace, but he's won the war. In Iraq, complicated, but still, Iran-supported actors hold a very dominant position. So in these cases, and you could add obviously Hezbollah and Lebanon in that. So why would Iran be willing to negotiate for something which suits it right now and which benefits it immensely, and losing it would cost it a lot in terms of its security, because that's its deterrent? I don't see much of a scope for an agreement at that level, beyond obviously the nuclear one.
The interesting thing, of course, with the maximum pressure campaign is that what we've seen in many decades of sanctions scholarship is that sanctions that try to cripple a country's economy and ultimately hurt its population are very widely considered within academia, at least, to be ineffective. So when we look at what the Trump administration was doing with the maximum pressure campaign, we could see it's not going to help the US reach its stated policy aims. It was over 60 years ago that the naive theory of sanctions was coined, that referred to this type of approach, and many studies, and particularly some of my colleagues in Geneva more recently have shown that when this breadth of sanctions are in place and this kind of damage that they impose, they're not effective.
آنچه در مورد ما میگویند